Training alone did not define what these women were becoming. Just as important was the fact that they were learning inside limitation from the outset. The constraints described in the previous section did not wait until combat to become relevant. They were already present in the work of becoming capable. Minimal instrumentation, night conditions, exposure to weather, and the handling realities of the PO2 shaped the learning environment itself. This meant that adaptation was not a later refinement layered on top of stable competence. Adaptation was part of competence from the beginning. To learn to fly under these conditions was to learn that information would often be incomplete, that visibility would be poor, that the aircraft would not compensate for error, and that the environment would not simplify itself for the sake of training. The women were being prepared not for ideal execution, but for function within narrow margins. That distinction clarifies much about the regiment's later method. Their tactics would eventually be described in terms of ingenuity, silence, and repeated pressure, but those qualities were inseparable from the conditions in which their operational thinking developed. They were not trained first in abundance and later deprived of it. They were shaped by scarcity and exposure from the beginning. In that sense, the learning environment and the combat environment were linked. The habits that mattered later were the habits formed when equipment was limited, the night was difficult, and precision had to be learned without waiting for confidence to arrive first. This is also where the moral tone of the book matters. It would be easy to romanticize this process into a story of toughness proven through hardship. That is not quite right. Hardship alone proves nothing. What matters is what was built within it. The training of these women was significant because it produced functional adaptation under severe constraints, not because suffering itself carried meaning. Their later combat effectiveness came from the disciplined conversion of pressure into method. By the end of this phase, the essential shift had begun. These women were no longer simply aspiring pilots or patriotic volunteers entering a new wartime category. They were becoming a unit whose members understood that survival and usefulness would depend on mastering a specific relationship between fragility and precision. The aircraft would not become stronger. The night would not become clearer. Time would not become more generous. What could change was their ability to think and act inside those fixed conditions with increasing exactness. That is the threshold at which this section closes. The women have entered the system and begun to be shaped by it. They have not yet demonstrated the full form of their method, but the conditions that will make that method necessary are now in place. The next step is no longer formation alone. It is operation. Once trained under constraint, what exactly did they do, and how did that pattern of action become effective enough to matter?